My name is Morel Dawson. I was 32 when the envelope arrived, but this story really begins 14 years earlier, in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and unfinished arguments. At 18, I still believed love in a family was something automatic, like breathing. I didn't yet know it could be rationed, weighed, and handed out in smaller portions to the child who was easier to love. Our house sat at the end of Larkspur Lane, a modest two-story, with a porch swing that creaked in a rhythm I could still hum if you asked me to. My father worked long shifts at the hardware distribution center. My mother kept the household running with the quiet, tired efficiency of a woman who had stopped expecting help. And my younger sister, Odessa, moved through our home like she owned the deed to it. Odessa was 16 then, golden-haired and sharp-tongued, the kind of sharp that people mistook for wit until it was aimed at them. I loved her the way you love someone you've watched grow up, unconditionally, and a little blindly. I didn't see the storm building. I was too busy filling out community college forms at the kitchen table, too busy working weekend shifts at the pharmacy to save for a car that would get me to classes. I didn't see how every small victory of mine, a good grade, a compliment from an aunt, a boy who liked me instead of her, chipped away at something in Odessa that I never understood until much later. There's a particular kind of silence that exists in houses where resentment is growing. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's just a slight change in the air, a held breath before a door slams. I remember standing at the sink one evening, washing the last dish, when I heard my mother's voice drop to that careful, placating tone she used only with Odessa. I remember thinking, she's protecting her from something. I didn't yet understand that the something was me. That night I read over my acceptance letter for the 5th time, the paper soft at the folds from handling. I imagined telling my grandmother, who had passed the year before, how proud she would have been. I imagined a version of my life that was steady, upward, mine. I had no way of knowing that the ground beneath that imagined life was already cracking, quietly, in a conversation I wasn't part of, one where my name was being spoken in the past tense before I had even left the room. It happened on a Tuesday, which felt wrong even then. Betrayals, I thought, should come on Fridays, dressed in something dramatic. Instead, it came in the flat, ordinary light of a weekday evening, my mother's hands twisting a dish towel like it owed her an apology. "Your sister says she can't stay in this house anymore," she said. "Not with you here." I remember laughing, not from humor, but from the particular disbelief that comes when your mind refuses a sentence before your ears fully process it. What does that mean? Odessa was standing in the doorway to the hall, arms crossed, chin lifted in the posture of someone who had already rehearsed her victory. "It means what it means," she said. "She leaves, or I do." I looked at my father first, because I had always believed he was the steadier of the two, the one who measured things before deciding them. He didn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the floor the way men look at floors when they've already made a decision they're ashamed of. "She's 16, my mother said quietly, as if that explained everything, as if arithmetic alone could justify what was happening. "You're 18. You're an adult now. I want to tell you I fought harder. I want to tell you I demanded reasons, that I extracted some confession about what Odessa believed I had done to deserve this. But grief works strangely in real time. It doesn't roar. It just hollows." I remember asking, in a voice that didn't sound like mine, "What did I do?" Odessa didn't answer. She didn't have to. I understood in that moment that this wasn't about anything I had done. It was about who I was allowed to become, measured against who she feared she might not. My father drove me to my aunt's apartment that night with 2 garbage bags of clothes in the trunk, the acceptance letter folded into my jacket pocket like something I needed to keep close to my body to prove it was real. He didn't speak the whole way. At a red light, he reached over and squeezed my hand once, briefly, like an apology too small to matter and too late to help. I didn't cry until I was alone in my aunt's guest room, sitting on a stranger's bed, in a life I hadn't chosen, wondering what version of me my family had decided wasn't worth keeping. Grief, I learned, doesn't announce itself. It moves in quietly and rearranges the furniture of who you are. My Aunt Ruth let me stay in her spare room for what was supposed to be a few weeks. It became 2 years. She never asked me to explain what happened, which I was grateful for, because I didn't yet have the language for it myself. I only knew that some nights I would lie awake replaying the scene in the kitchen, searching every gesture, every word, for the exact moment I had become unwanted. I finished community college with grades that surprised even me, working nights at a diner where the manager, an older woman named Corinne, seemed to understand without being told that I needed the extra shifts more than I needed the money, that showing up somewhere and being needed was its own kind of medicine. I didn't call home. My mother called twice that first year, both times with a voice full of careful, guilty small talk that never once mentioned Odessa or an apology. I let both calls end without asking the questions burning in my chest. I told myself I was being strong. Looking back, I think I was simply protecting myself from an answer I already knew, that no one was coming to undo what had been done. There is a particular loneliness in being erased by people who are still alive, still nearby, still capable of picking up a phone. It is different from loss through death. Death, at least, offers an ending. This offered only silence, stretching indefinitely, a door left ajar that never quite closed and never quite opened. I built a life in fragments. A transfer to a 4-year university on scholarship. A small apartment above a laundromat that smelled perpetually of fabric softener. A degree in organizational psychology, chosen half out of genuine interest and half, I suspect now, out of a desire to finally understand the mechanics of what had happened to me, how families quietly decide who stays and who goes and call it love. I did not think about revenge in those years. I thought about proof. I wanted, more than anything, to build a life so undeniably whole that the family who discarded me would have to reckon with what they'd thrown away. It wasn't cruelty. It was the quiet, aching hope of every abandoned child. Look what I became without you. 5 years after that Tuesday, my mother wrote me a letter. It arrived at my new apartment. How she found the address I never asked, in handwriting that trembled slightly at the edges of certain letters, the way handwriting does when someone is crying while they write. She said she missed me. She said Odessa had grown a lot and regretted things. She did not say what those things were. She did not use the word sorry. I sat with that letter for 3 days before I answered it. Part of me wanted, desperately, to write back with forgiveness prepackaged, to skip straight to the relief of reconciliation because the alternative, sustained distance, was exhausting to carry. But another part of me, the part that had learned to survive on nothing but its own resolve, recognized the letter for what it was, an invitation back into the same arrangement, dressed in softer language. I wrote back 1 page. I said I loved her. I said I was not ready to pretend the last 5 years hadn't happened. I said I would need, someday, an honest account of what occurred, not an apology performed for peace, but an acknowledgement, plain and unadorned. She did not write back for 8 months. When she did, it was to tell me my father had had a minor heart scare, nothing fatal, but enough to soften the air of the household, enough to make my mother's next letter warmer, more urgent. Come home for Sunday dinner, she wrote. Just once. Please. I remember standing in my kitchen, my own kitchen, in my own apartment, paid for with my own work, turning the phone over in my hand, feeling the old gravity of family pulling at me the way it always had, disguised as love, indistinguishable from obligation. I said yes, not because I had forgiven anything, but because I had grown enough, finally, to walk back into that house not as the girl who was thrown out, but as a woman who could choose to leave again if she needed to. That distinction, between being unable to leave and choosing to stay, was the quiet, private power I had spent 5 years building. No one in that house would ever know how much it had cost me to earn it. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the way childhood homes always do once you've lived somewhere the walls belong to you. My mother hugged me at the door for a long time, longer than the moment probably called for, as if trying to compress 5 years of absence into a single embrace. My father looked older, grayer, the heart scare having carved new lines into his face. He hugged me too, briefly, and said, "You look good, Morel," in a voice that cracked slightly on my name. Odessa was already at the table. She was 21 now, poised in a way that suggested she had learned how to hold a room without needing to fight for it. For a moment, looking at her, I felt the strange vertigo of seeing someone both entirely familiar and entirely changed.
"Hi," she said. "Just that."
Dinner was careful. Everyone spoke in the tone people use when they're navigating a minefield disguised as a dining room. Questions about my job, my apartment, safe topics with no possibility of detonation. I answered politely. I did not perform gratitude for being invited back. I simply existed at that table, calm, present, unwilling to shrink myself into the smaller shape they might have expected. It was my mother, not Odessa, who finally cracked the silence around the actual subject. "I think," she said, staring at her plate, "we owe you a conversation we never had." Odessa's fork stopped moving. My father set his glass down carefully, like it might otherwise slip. "I was scared," Odessa said finally, not looking up. "You were always," she started again. "Everyone talked about you, like you were the one who was going to make something of yourself. I heard it so many times, I started to believe there wasn't room for both of us to matter. So I made you the reason I couldn't." It was not the apology I had imagined in 100 versions over 5 years. It was smaller, messier, more human, an explanation offered instead of an absolution requested. I did not forgive her that night. I did not owe her that speed. But I said, honestly, "Thank you for finally saying it out loud." And for the first time since I was 18, the silence in that house felt like the beginning of something, instead of the end. I want to be honest about something the story doesn't often tell you. Reconciliation, when it finally comes, does not erase the years you spent without it. In the weeks that followed that dinner, my mother called more often. My father sent occasional texts, clumsy, endearing attempts at closeness he'd never learned how to offer directly. Odessa reached out twice, tentative, testing whether the door I'd left open was truly open or merely unlocked. I let each of them in slowly, at my own pace, on my own terms. I had learned, in 5 years of building a life without them, that love offered without boundaries is not safety. It's just another version of the arrangement that had discarded me once already. I visited my Aunt Ruth that same month, the woman who had taken in an 18-year-old with 2 garbage bags and no explanation, and asked her how she'd known, all those years ago, not to push me toward forgiveness before I was ready. "Because forgiveness rushed is just another kind of abandonment," she said. "Of yourself, this time." That sentence stayed with me longer than almost anything else in the story. I thought often, in those weeks, about the version of me that existed the night my father drove me to Ruth's apartment in silence. That 18-year-old girl believed, with the particular certainty of the young, that being unwanted by your family meant something permanent and total about your worth. It took years to understand that her family's failure to hold her was never a verdict on who she was, only a reflection of who they, in their fear and favoritism, had chosen not to become. I did not need Odessa's regret to know that. I had already built the proof myself, brick by brick, in the years no one from that house had witnessed. But her regret, when it finally came, mattered anyway, not because I needed it to feel whole, but because it meant she, too, had finally grown into someone capable of telling the truth. 6 months after that dinner, I found the old acceptance letter while unpacking a box I'd carried, unopened, through 3 different apartments. The paper had yellowed slightly, the folds gone soft and translucent with age. I sat on my kitchen floor and read it again, the way I had that first devastating night at 18, except this time there was no fear folded into it, only a strange, tender pride for the girl who had kept it anyway, who had believed, even while being cast out, that her future was still worth carrying with her. I brought the letter to Sunday dinner the following week, not out of any need to prove something, but because I wanted my family to see the object that had steadied me through the worst of it, a small, physical thing that had outlasted their rejection. My mother cried when she saw it, not performatively, quietly, the way people cry when confronted with the actual cost of what they did, rather than the abstract idea of it. "You kept it," she said. "Through all of it, you kept it." "It was the only thing that was still mine," I said.
"So yes,
I kept it." Odessa reached across the table and touched the edge of the paper carefully, as if it were something sacred. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that if I could just make you smaller, I'd finally feel like I had room to be someone. I was wrong. You leaving didn't make me bigger. It just made the house quieter and me lonelier.
I didn't need her to say more than that.
Some truths don't require elaboration once they're finally spoken plainly. That evening, driving home, I realized something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not vindication, but a kind of quiet, settled peace. The sense that I had spent years chasing proof I no longer needed because I had already become, entirely on my own, the person that 18-year-old girl had once hoped she might. I am 32 now, sitting at my own kitchen table on a Sunday morning that belongs to no one but me, the acceptance letter framed on the wall of my office, faded but legible, a relic of a version of myself I have never stopped being proud of. My relationship with my family today is neither the fantasy of full restoration nor the wound of permanent estrangement. It exists in the more honest, complicated middle, Sunday dinner some months, silence in others, an ongoing negotiation between people learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to hold each other without repeating old harm. Odessa and I speak more now than we have in 14 years. Not as the sisters we might have been without that Tuesday, but as two women who have each, separately, had to learn what it costs to build a self worth keeping. I don't know if I have fully forgiven her. I know I no longer carry her choice as a verdict on my worth, and that distinction has made all the difference. My parents are older now, gentler in the way people become when time has stripped away their certainty about the choices they once made so easily. I do not resent them the way I once thought I always would. I understand them more than I ever expected to, not as excuse, but as explanation. Two tired people who chose the path that required less courage and spent years afterward quietly paying for it. If there's a lesson in 14 years of silence, reunion, and slow repair, it is this. The family that discards you does not get to decide who you become in the years they weren't there. That decision belongs entirely to you, made alone, in small rooms, on ordinary nights, with nothing but stubborn hope and a folded piece of paper to prove your future was still worth believing in. I was 18 when I lost a house. I was 32 when I finally understood that I had never, in all those years between, lost myself. The porch swing at Larkspur Lane still creaks in the same rhythm. I know because I sat on it last Sunday, my sister beside me, both of us quiet, both of us finally and perfectly home. Family doesn't get to define your worth by who they choose to keep. Sometimes the ones who let you go are the reason you finally learn how strong you really are. If this story moved you, hit like, drop a comment telling me which part hit hardest, and subscribe. New emotional stories drop every week. And if someone in your life needs to hear that walking away doesn't mean losing yourself, send them this one.